These blessed tools of war shall lead the righteous to victory, but only if they seek the knowledge to use them efficiently. This holy work shall serve as your guide so that you may swiftly dispatch the heretic and usher in the light of the Emperor so that the forces of chaos may perish. This is the Weapon Codex. The Devil's Claw swords are fast, finesse-based weapons that excel in not only offensive but defensive tactics thanks to their unique special ability, the parry. During the parry time frame, any attack that hits you will be parried and cause you to perform a counterattack that deals increased stagger and headshot damage. Attacks that would normally go through block, such as Crusher and Mauler overheads, can be parried with 0 bleed-through damage, albeit at a very high stamina cost. However, blocking less than 1/3 of a second before an attack hits you achieves a perfect parry, which massively reduces your stamina reduction while parrying and can allow you to deflect normally deadly attacks with ease. Perfect parrying also does not have an increased stamina cost for blocking outside of your effective block angle, making it incredibly effective no matter which direction you face. When it comes to the Devil's Claw swords, learning when and how to parry is key to get the most out of these weapons. After a parry, you are left vulnerable to attacks for a brief moment, so spamming parry in the middle of a horde is not a good idea as it will cause you to eat a lot of unnecessary hits. Instead, use parry as a tool to deflect last-minute blows that you see or hear via the hit notification sound, which is that whooshing sound you hear right before you get hit, or to survive attacks from Crushers, Maulers, bosses, and other enemies that you would otherwise be unable to avoid. You can also parry Ragers to stagger them out of their flurry and make them an easy kill. Parrying is also incredibly useful versus all bosses, as timing parries correctly allows you to fully deflect each blow of a boss's attack combo, including the incredibly fast combos of the Chaos Spawn and the sword-wielding Traitor Captain. It is possible to time parries and chain multiple perfect parries together to consume a very minimal amount of stamina, but multiple factors can cause you to mistime your parry and cause you to drain too much stamina and lead to a block break, which you cannot parry your way out of. Running block efficiency helps to prevent this and can cover for any mistakes or mistimes, as block efficiency applies to non-perfect parries, but not to perfect parries. The parry can also be used to great effect in dodge dancing Plague Ogrins, and can even be used in order to kite. By purposefully jumping into their attacks, you can send yourself flying further backwards to help you put some distance between you and the boss. You can also use the parry to avoid taking damage from the AoE attacks of the Plogren and the Beast of Nurgle. There are 3 different kinds of claw swords, with each of them having subtle but important differences in design, purpose, and attack patterns. The Mark I claw sword has a heavy focus on controlling and clearing hordes, with the lowest armor damage out of the 3 options. Its optimal attack combos are as follows. For horde clear, heavy attack spam is this weapon's best option, although you can chain a heavy attack into a light attack for a slightly faster combo if you so desire. Its single target combo is a bit tricky. The most consistent amount of single target damage also lies with its heavy attack spam, but the stagger of its heavy attacks is too low to reliably affect elites and many specials, which often makes it less effective due to how unsafe it is. This leaves you with 2 main options for single target damage, neither of which are particularly good at damaging carapace armor. For a high staggering and damaging attack, your best option is to parry and aim for the head with the weapon's riposte. However, this kind of attack loses its effectiveness and safety the more enemies that are attacking you at once, and successfully pulling off parry after parry is hugely dependent on your own personal skill as well as your ping to the servers. For a slightly faster yet lower staggering and damaging attack, you can also push attack into a light attack to get to the weapon's 3rd light attack, which is an overhead strike. The overhead strike has a high finesse modifier and does increased headshot damage, and while repeated pushing will stagger lesser enemies like gunners, you won't be able to stagger larger enemies like maulers and ragers unless you parry their attacks. The Mark I is admittedly the most difficult clawsword to use out of the three, as its lack of armor damage really makes it struggle against mixed hordes in any situation against tougher units. The parry can assist in this by adding some much-needed stagger and damage, but even with the parry, this weapon will continue to struggle with maulers and especially crushers. If you ever choose to run the Mark I, it's best to have another ranged weapon, blitz, or ultimate ability to help you deal with these enemies and allow you to focus on using the sword as a horde clear tool. The Mark IV clawsword is a jack-of-all-trades weapon that can do a little bit of everything at once. Its optimal attack combos are as follows. For horde clear and control, a light attack followed by a heavy will allow you to chain repeated horizontal strikes together. Compared to the combo of the Mark I, the Mark IV's combo trades horde control for much more horde damage and can allow you to eliminate hordes at record speeds. For single target damage, a heavy attack followed by a parry cancel is your best option, as it boasts good single target damage and stagger. What it may lack in horde control and boss damage, the Mark IV more than makes up for it in its versatility, as it can fulfill almost any role you need in the moment. Many consider the Mark IV to be the strongest option out of the claw swords for this versatility alone, and when you also consider the good defensive option it has with its parry, the Mark IV certainly becomes one of the strongest melee contenders for effective one-handed sword options. The Mark VII clawsword has a focus on single-target attacks and damage, with moderate horde-clearing capabilities. Its optimal attack combos are as follows. For horde clear, a heavy attack followed by a light attack is your best combo, although you can trade speed and damage for extra defense by parry canceling the first heavy attack, which can help in a mixed horde full of ragers and other armored elites. For single target damage, you have many different options. A push attack followed by a light attack grants you a stab followed by an overhead strike. While this combo lacks carapace armor damage, it does grant quick single target damage versus all else that can briefly stagger lesser units when needed, but is inherently limited due to its stamina usage. Another option is one that consumes no stamina and follows the pattern of light, heavy, light for 3 overhead strikes. This will be your main single target combo due to the fact that it does not consume stamina and is easily repeatable. The sole heavy strike of this combo is the main damage dealer, and when paired with Fury of the Faithful can actually deal a respectable amount of damage to carapace armored units. Your final option combines the 2 above combos into a single combo of push attack, light, light, heavy. This combo chains perfectly back into the light, light, heavy combo and grants you the highest damaging single target attack on not only the Mark VII, but across every clawsword, and is one of the only attacks across all clawswords that can damage carapace armor in an actually significant way. Something to note regarding single target attack combos of the Devil's Claw swords is that in isolation, the Parry's Riposte is the best attack to damage single targets due to its high stagger and headshot damage. While you should absolutely use the parry attacks when possible, you cannot always rely on it, as attempting to constantly parry enemies who are in massive hordes will cause you to eat a lot of hits. It's almost always worth it to parry a lone elite or a crusher's overhead while in a horde, but a huge part of getting the most out of the claw swords is determining when it is safe to parry versus falling back on your attack combos. Remember that ultimately, parrying is a powerfully potent tool, but will not make you invincible should you misuse it. When searching for a weapon, you'll want to find an optimal stat distribution that allows you to get the most out of your weapon. Every weapon in the game has what's known as a dump stat, which is the stat of the weapon that is least important compared to its other stats, and can therefore be dumped as low as possible to max out the other stats. When it comes to the Devil's Claw sword, there's kind of a debate going on whether mobility or cleave targets is the claw sword's primary dump stat. To quickly summarize the arguments for both, some say mobility since it's the only stat that doesn't affect damage, and reducing damage on a melee weapon is inherently messing with breakpoints, while others say cleave targets because reducing dodge on a melee weapon screws with your ability to survive more often than not, plus running a cleave blessing like Savage Sweep or Wrath completely offsets the need for cleave targets in the first place. Most weapons have a very clear and defined dump stat, but specifically for the Devil's Claw swords, I would argue that either of these stats could be your dump stat depending on your build. If you choose to use one of the cleave blessings, then it is very true that the base value of your cleave target stat isn't that important. However, it's also possible to run a high mobility build in which mobility as a stat isn't as important. One of the example builds I'll showcase later on is a mobility-focused crit build on Zealot that uses a claw sword with its mobility stat at 60%, and due to the high mobility the build inherently grants you, you rarely feel that 60% stat. The claw sword's parry is also a massive help in offsetting the lessened mobility, as it can easily allow you to survive Crusher and Mauler attacks that would otherwise kill you. This is especially important because in higher difficulties, hordes become less of an issue while elites become more dangerous. And I would also say that it's completely viable just to split the dump between these two stats equally and run them both at 70%, since the difference between these stats at 70 versus 80% is not that noticeable. When it comes to blessings, you're always going to want to run Rampage to help boost the sword's damage regardless of the build you run. For the second blessing, you have a choice between Shred and one of the cleave blessings. Shred will further boost the overall damage of the claw sword and allow it to reach its maximum damage potential, whereas cleave blessings grant you better control against hordes, primarily made of dragon scab bruisers, since the claw sword kind of struggles to cleave through mass amounts of flak armor. It's generally better to run Rampage and Shred since the cleave of the claw swords is good enough to function without additional help. Aiming for the unarmored parts of Dragon Scab Bruisers also allow you to avoid the claw sword struggle versus massive flak hordes, but if you find yourself struggling via hordes, you can consider switching out Shred for one of the cleave blessings. Regarding cleave blessings, your primary options are between Savage Sweep and Wrath. They're pretty equal, although Wrath tends to be more reliable since stacks refresh on a single target hit rather than after cleaving 3 targets, which isn't always possible to accomplish when elites and ragers get mixed into a horde. Devastating Strike is not good since it grants overall less cleave and is not worth running, even on crit builds. Also, keep in mind that in specifically Havoc mode, Wrath is a requirement for the claw swords to function due to the enemy's higher hitmass values. When it comes to perks, flak is crucial to help the swords fare better against flak hordes and lesser flak-armored enemies like shotgunners and ragers. The second perk slot is best used for either maniac or unarmored damage, depending on your build and blessing selections. Unarmored allows you to more easily hit one-shot headshot breakpoints against scab bruisers and makes horde clearing easier in general, whereas Maniac reduces your time to kill against Maniac enemies, especially against mutants and drag ragers. Additionally, Unarmored and Maniac grants 2 different breakpoints. Maniac allows for one-shot headshots versus mutants on a crit, whereas Unarmored allows for one-shot headshots versus drag gunners on a crit. It's important to note that you can reach this breakpoint versus mutants with full stacks of Sustained Assault and no Maniac damage on your sword, whereas full stacks of Sustained Assault is not enough to reach the same breakpoint versus Scab Gunners without unarmored damage, even when taking the 2 plus 5% melee damage nodes on Zealot's skill tree. But adding Rampage on top of Sustained Assault and these 2 nodes is enough to reach that breakpoint. One of the most important questions to ask yourself when deciding on either unarmored or maniac damage is which breakpoint is more important for you to be able to reach reliably without having to worry about proccing something else. Personally, mutants irritate me enough to want to be able to reach that breakpoint at all times, so I run Maniac, but it's also entirely valid to wish a swift death to Scab Gunners and run unarmored damage as well. Before discussing potential builds, I would like to give a brief disclaimer. Darktide in general has a massive amount of build variety and build potential. This vastness means that there is really no true one-size-fits-all build for every person, and while there certainly is a meta, this meta is not necessarily all-encompassing. A meta build in Darktide is what works best for the majority of people, but depending on your personal playstyle, desires, and ideas of what you may consider fun, the meta may not always be right for you. While the builds I offer in these parts of the videos are complete and can be run as is, I aim to give as much freedom to tweak them and options for you to choose from as possible, so that you can truly make them your own. Because of this, some of my builds will have a leftover node or two that you are free to place wherever you want, and I will frequently offer you choices between paths or nodes so that you can have more fine control over what you want to run. The Mark VII Claw Sword can be used to great effect on Zealot, whose various damage talents help the weapon to reach its maximum damage potential. We'll start with the standard perk loadout of Flak and Maniac, with Shred and Rampage for our blessing choices. Because we're running Rampage, we won't need to run unarmored damage, and Zealot's various damage increase nodes can help us reach that breakpoint if we so happen to get into a situation where we can't cleave through enough to proc Rampage. We'll also want to pick up a ranged weapon that does well versus Carapace armor, so I'll throw on a Revolver. We'll be creating a crit-focused build that grants us as much uptime as possible with Fury of the Faithful to get as much use out of our Maniac perk as possible, while also grabbing some flat damage increase nodes to maximize the damage potential of the Claw Sword. Quickly dip down the right side of the tree to grab Scourge, then go down the center path to grab Purge and Restoring Faith. Go back down the left side of the tree to grab Duelist and Until Death, as well as Fury of the Faithful and its modifier node. Continue down the left side of the tree for Blazing Piety and Invocation of Death, and go down the center to grab the extra attack speed from Faithful Frenzy, as well as the right side of the tree for Sustained Assault and Swift Certainty. The extra crit chance from Scourge and Blazing Piety will allow you to get consistent burst damage from crits. This damage is also increased by the base damage from Sustained Assault and the extra attack speed from Faithful Frenzy, since faster attacks equals more DPS. You'll be able to hit the breakpoints for one-shot headshotting a large chunk of trash units with full stacks of Sustained Assault and Duelist active, which will be active most of the time you're in prolonged melee combat. And with Fury, you'll have on-demand crits that you can use to delete any elite or special in the blink of an eye. The recently buffed Invocation of Death will also allow you to gain increased cooldown reduction, which is supported by Scourge, Piety, and Fury of the Faithful. An alternate path to consider taking with this build is removing a point from Swift Certainty and replacing it with Disdain at the top of the tree. Using Disdain allows you to reach specific breakpoints that would otherwise only be reachable if you crit. With full stacks of Sustained Assault and 2 stacks of Disdain, you'll be able to reach one-shot headshot breakpoints versus Ragers when attacking them with the overhead heavy strike after using Fury. Additionally, with full stacks of Disdain, Sustained Assault, and Rampage up, you can one-shot headshot Drake Bruisers with the heavy attack in the Horde Clear combos. It is admittedly difficult to guarantee full stacks of Disdain though, so this choice is fully up to personal preference. The Mark IV is a great fit into any build. You can plug it into the build I offered for the Mark VII and it would also do incredibly well. Due to its versatility though, it's a solid pick for more ranged heavy builds that can offer some solid offensive and defensive capabilities. For this build, we'll look at Veteran, but you could also use Psyker if you wanted to trade damage for defense by using the Claw Sword instead of the Force Sword or Sabers. We'll be running the exact same loadout as before, but we'll be replacing Maniac damage with unarmored damage since I no longer have guaranteed crits via Fury to make use of the Mutant Breakpoint. Once again, I want to pick a ranged weapon that has some good Carapace armor damage. The Bolter fits perfectly for the build I have in mind, but you can also use other Carapace piercing weapons, including the revolvers or the plasma gun. We'll be creating a weapons specialist veteran who can be equally potent in both melee and ranged. If you're running Bolter, go down the left side of the tree to grab Volley Adept, which is good for the Bolter since it has no time limit and is just active until you choose to reload. Otherwise, you can choose to go down the left or the center to grab Confirmed Kill. Make sure to grab Survivalist and Voice of Command with the Duty and Honor node, and then dip into the left side of the tree to grab Precision Strikes. Dip into the center and grab For the Emperor, and then go down the right side of the skill tree, making sure to grab Close Quarters Kill Zone, Desperado, Trench Fighter Drill, Skirmisher, and the Weapons Specialist node. The keystone modifier nodes you take kind of depends on your ranged weapon of choice. You'll want to take both ranged nodes if you run Plasma or Bolter to help with the uptime of the weapons, but otherwise you can make do without them. Invigorated is nice for this build, as the instant stamina can help you pull off an emergency perfect parry when low on stamina, and while conditioning is nice as it can allow you to normal parry a Mauler's overhead without breaking your block, the cooldown of Voice of Command is short enough that this won't really be necessary, and you can achieve the same effect by just running block efficiency on your Curios. On Your Toes offers nice survivability, but if you're playing Shock Troop Gauntlet or higher difficulties with increased spawns, it's better to put that point into Tactical Awareness since it has no internal cooldown. This means that depending on your ranged weapon, you'll have up to 4 leftover talent points. Where exactly you put them is ultimately up to you, but I'd highly recommend choosing between Fully Loaded, Superiority Complex, Marksman, Tactical Awareness, and Iron Will. Since I'm running the Bolter, this means I'll only have 2 leftover talent points. I'm confident in my own abilities to not need any more defensive nodes, so I'll put them into Fully Loaded and Marksman to help squeeze out extra damage. By running a powerful weapon like the Bolter or Plasma Gun, you don't need to lean into the ranged part of Vet's tree too much to gain value from them, which allows us to focus on grabbing talents to help with melee. You're free to take either crack or frag grenades, but Survivalist is necessary to help keep your ranged weapon in the fight. Grab either Demolition Stockpile or Field Improv to help with grenade sustainability, and Voice of Command, when used with the Claw Sword, will give you most of the survivability you need for this build. Precision Strikes apply to both melee and ranged, which is going to help us reach those breakpoints for the Devil's Claw Sword, and for the Emperor allows us to eke out some extra damage on ult. All of the nodes on the right side of the tree will greatly help in making your melee weapons significantly more potent. The ranged nodes on Weapon Specialist will really help the uptime with slower weapons like the Bolter and Plasma, and Skirmisher in particular is crucial to this build. Only 1 stack is required to hit the headshot breakpoint for bruisers, without us needing to take unarmored damage on our claw weapon. It's also a very easy buff to proc, meaning you're going to be able to hit that breakpoint more often than not.